Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me today is no one, but we do have an episode. Couple months ago, Ryan Pack from the Soundtrack of Your Life podcast reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to join him for us to talk about Blinded by the Light, the movie and the soundtrack. I said yes, and so this is a crossover episode, a double feature, if you want to say. You will hear in just a few minutes. Ryan and I discuss the film. We'll talk. You can find Ryan on Soundtrack Your Life podcast wherever you find your podcasts. And he and I are talking about trying to do another one sometime soon. But for now, enjoy this discussion of Blinded by the Light. Oh, sorry. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
I'm Ryan Pack, and this is Soundtrack Your Life. I'd like to thank you for listening wherever you are and however you are. Today, Jesse Jackson from the Set Listing Bruce podcast is the guest. Welcome, Jesse.
Well, thank you, Ryan. It is good to be here. I'm excited. We're doing a double feature, right? We're going to release this on both feeds, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to do that. And so
Yeah,
you have a podcast called Set Listing Bruce. So why don't you tell our listeners about that podcast?
I sure will. So, Set Listing Bruce it started out as a Bruce Springsteen fan podcast. That's probably what 80% of my episodes are. Over the past 6 years, I have talked to hundreds of Bruce Springsteen fans from around the world. I am up to, in September, I think I will hit episode 900. I've talked to people from Europe, from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Germany, Russia, just all over the world, talking about their love of Bruce Springsteen and his music. The other things I do is I do what we call B-side episodes, where if, let's say, someone loves the Bee Gees or Guns N' Roses, they'll join me and talk about their fandom and do that. And the other thing that I've been expanding is I've been having a lot of different podcasters join me, and they kind of talk about their podcasts. They share what they're passionate about, and we kind of weave in a discussion of music. So it's mostly excuse for me to talk to cool people. So, and I'm definitely including you in that category.
Thank you so much. And obviously, I'm excited to be talking to you. Not the biggest Bruce Springsteen fan. I would call myself a casual Springsteen fan.
That's okay.
But yeah, I'm really excited to. I mean, what you do is super cool. The fact that you've talked
Thanks.
to all these different fans around the world.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about a super fan in a little bit.
Yes, we are.
So I know that you host a couple other podcasts. So what podcasts are those?
Sure. So I also do a Doctor Who podcast called Next Stop Everywhere. We've been doing that for probably 7, 8 years. And what we do, me and my co-host, a guy named Charles Skaggs, during whenever Doctor Who is current, we cover the new episode every week. And then during off seasons, we go back and explore classic Who and modern Who. We did not start doing a weekly podcast till Peter Capaldi's time as the Doctor. And so we go back and discuss all those, the prior episodes. And it's more of a typical episode discussion. We'll go through the different who's the guest cast doing that. Then I do my newest podcast is a Babylon 5 rewatch. Karen and Lou are two of my oldest podcast friends, and neither one them had watched the science fiction classic Babylon 5, that series. And so we've kind of gone full circle, Ryan, that my first podcast I did was a Farscape podcast, that the science fiction show that came from Australia that had, Jim Henson Muppets. And Karen and Lou were the veterans. They had seen every episode of Farscape multiple times, and I was watching it for the first time, and I was the newbie. And then they've never seen Babylon 5, and I've seen it multiple times. So they're the rookies this time, and I'm the veteran. And we're going through episode one by one. And then my last podcast, which is kind of just an excuse for me and my buddies to hang out, is called How Many? And so a good example of a topic that would be, touch close to your and your listeners' heart is we might say, okay, we have a list that we have pulled together of the 50 top rock and roll soundtracks. Now, how many of them are actually good? And then there's four of us, and we all kind of round robin. And before we make a guess, we say, okay, we're going to talk 50. And someone may say, well, I think 30 of them are going to be good. And we say, okay, there's always someone who says, okay, well, 30 was the highest number. I'm going to take 31 so that I have the over. And we kind of play with it. And the fun is you don't know what your co-hosts are going to think is good. And so we'll have debates on like, no, this is absolutely a good soundtrack. And then, two or three people will know. And so we have that. And so the name comes from how many. So we guess like in advance how many are going to be. And it's mostly excuse for us to just, sit around and BS together. So those are the different podcasts. I'm debating. Charles and I are talking about maybe doing a one-off Star Trek podcast, but my wife looks at me every once in a while and says, "You may have a problem."
That's great. If you're listening, check all those podcasts out. They all sound like a lot of fun. But today we're going to talk about the 2019 Gurinder Chadha film, Blinded by the Lights.
Yes.
I would normally ask the guest why we're talking about this movie, but since it is a movie featuring 12 songs by Bruce Springsteen and you have a Bruce Springsteen podcast, I'm going to answer that question for you.
It is kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? When you and I were exchanging emails back and forth, we were debating and talking about things, and I'm like, hey, have you guys covered Blinded by the Light yet? And you go, no. Let's do that. That seems like a perfect fit.
Yeah, and then after watching the movie, because I hadn't seen it before, it kind of seems like the perfect hybrid of our podcasts, where we're going to be talking a lot about Bruce Springsteen, of course.
Yeah.
But it's also like Bruce Springsteen kind of soundtracked this character's life in a way that Bruce Springsteen probably never thought was imaginable.
Yes.
So I think it's kind of the perfect movie for us to talk about. And we brought up Springsteen a couple times on this podcast before. We've never covered any of his actual songs.
Okay.
So we've covered High Fidelity, where he makes a cameo and he gives advice to Rob Gordon. And then I was interviewing John Munson from Semisonic at the beginning of the year. And he was telling a story about how Courtney Cox used kind of some of her entertainment business connections to sit in on like a listening party for their album. So it was the first time the band was listening to Feeling Strangely Fine, which, is best known as the album that had Closing Time.
Okay.
So they're sitting at the mixer's house in Hollywood, and they're going to hear the album in sequence for the first time, and Courtney Cox shows up. And so I made the joke to John. I said, did anyone make a Dancing in the Dark joke?
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately felt stupid I felt like it was low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
But then he saved me and immediately said, well, I'm sure someone did, because that video was shot at the St. Paul Civic Center, and Semisonic is from Minnesota. So people from Minnesota typically, they're very proud of things like that when, Bruce Springsteen has a music video shot there. But he
Absolutely.
but he picked up on it like right away. He was like, "Oh yeah, someone definitely made that joke because that video was shot in Minnesota."
Very cool.
So I thought you would enjoy that story.
I do. Thank you.
So first, I watched the trailer for the film,
Okay.
and it reminded me a lot of Bend It Like Beckham, which has the same director and writer. But then I saw it was inspired by a true story, and I thought that was very fascinating. So, what were your thoughts when you first heard about this movie that was going to be centered around Bruce Springsteen's music?
All right. So, Ryan, you have to wheel me in if I talk too much, because I have many stories to share, and but I don't want this to be a monopoly. I want it to be a conversation. So, um, when I first heard about the movie and the preview came out, um, I was working at a software company in and there was a big conference room where you could cast your laptop right onto the big screen. And so we were finishing up a meeting, and I had like 7 or 8 people in the meeting, and I said, I have a question for you. And they go, okay, what? And I said, how many times do you think I will go see this movie? And so I pull up the thing, and at first, right, they're don't you want me, baby? And they're all looking very confused. And then all of a sudden you get to the Springsteen, and they start laughing out loud, and they're like, you may see this a dozen times. So yes, I was very excited about the movie. I went and bought the book that it was based on and read it. Really enjoyed the book. It is certainly about Bruce, but it is also a lot about his journey with his relationship with his father, and his journey of how he is Pakistani and he is British. And that, how do I come to grips with both of those? I am both things. I'm not one or the other. And I thought it was a really interesting book because, you know, I'm I was born in Louisiana. I've lived in the US my whole life, except for like a year in Germany because my dad was stationed there, and I have a very central, I'm a Southern culture. That's it. But I could see that too. How am I need to be proud of my Pakistani roots, but also proud of my British roots. So I found the book fascinating and really enjoyed it. So I was looking forward to the movie, and spoilers, I was not disappointed. I thought that it really captured the feeling of the book, and partly because he worked with Shonda, you know, eh, eh, you
Right.
know, in helping to write and do the book.
Yeah, he's credited as one of the screenwriters.
Yes. So, what was your first thought when you see when you saw the trailer?
When I saw the trailer, I guess I was a little confused.
Hmm.
I didn't know how they were going to. I don't know. It seemed a little cheesy. It
Yeah.
seemed very uplifting. And then I think I looked at the track listing for the soundtrack, and I saw that there were a couple tracks of the actors singing Bruce Springsteen songs.
Hmm.
And then I was petrified that I was going to be watching like a Bruce Springsteen musical.
Yes. Like the Mamma Mia, or Moving Out, the Billy Joe musical, or one of those kind of things, right?
Yeah, and I was like, I don't want to see that.
Yes.
So I was pleasantly surprised when I got to see the movie. I really appreciated how dark the movie gets,
Yes.
which you don't really get from the trailer. You see a little bit of the racism in the trailer, but it is covered much more in depth in the film.
Hmm.
And recently I had listened to a podcast called Self Evident, and they did an episode on racism in the UK in the 80s and how ska kind of became this anti racism movement.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there's no ska in this movie, but I felt like I got a visual of what they were talking about with how, the Pakistani families were being treated.
By the way, to give credit, Greetings from Bury Park, Race, Religion, and Rock and Roll is the book, which of course is Greetings from Ashbury Park is
Mhm.
Bruce, one of the albums. So it's kind of a pun. Um, the, the, the other thing that I thought was interesting, not only the racism, but I think this shows it does a really good job of showing the passion of a newly converted fan of almost anything. When you discover whether it's your favorite, football team, or you discover a new band, or you discover a new book, you are so passionate that you are almost overly passionate. You become obsessed and passionate. And I thought they did a good job of showing how our main character, Javi, actually almost, and even I, as a guy who does a Springsteen podcast, right, could see he's going almost overboard in that fandom because
Right.
it's so new and it's speaking to him so much.
Yeah, and I really like how they kind of visualize the lyrics as he's
Oh,
going on this journey of becoming a fan.
yes.
It's kind of like a music video, but it doesn't take you out of the movie.
No. Yeah, like the scene when and hopefully everyone's seen the movie, and if not, I recommend it strongly. But there's a scene when he's first listening to it, and there's a storm, and they're projecting the lyrics on like the wall, and you could see that it's in his mind. I think that's really well done, and I love the idea that right that this how does a Pakistani teenager living in the UK feel like this 30-year-old white guy from New Jersey is speaking for his voice?
Right. And I think there's a joke at the end of the movie where his dad says, "Are you sure that he's, this white American?" A lot
Yeah.
of what he's talking about, I feel like, is what a Pakistani father would say.
Yes, it is. I love that. So I don't know. I don't know the right time, but um, I have trivia about the movie if you want to hear. And so you tell me when's the best time to share it.
Oh, we can dive in right now.
Okay, so I was lucky enough to Gundershada joined me on the podcast and let me interview her, which was a thrill. So she tells the story that she has been a fan of Bruce forever. And she talked about on the podcast that when she saw the cover to Born to Run and saw the big man, that was it, seeing Clarence Clemens and Bruce. And so she was a um, at a festival, and they were showing I think The Promise was the documentary. I'm not sure what, but there was a documentary showing at a film festival, and Bruce was leaving, and he saw um, the guy who wrote the book, and I always get his name wrong, and so Sarfraz Manzoor, and he saw him, and Bruce walked over and said, "I read your book, and I really liked it." And he said, "Great, we want to do a movie, and we're going to need your help on it." And he said, "Okay, talk to John." And he pointed to John Landau, his manager. And sure enough, John said, "Hey, here, send me the details." And so very quickly, John, through Bruce, said, "Whatever you want, whatever music you need, it's ours. It's yours. You're free to use." And she said that was a gift that she felt so special about. And then the last thing that I thought was amazing is when he watched the film. and they did not know he was going to be at a screening, and he kind of showed up, and he came back afterwards and he hugged her and he says, "Thank you for making me look so cool."
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's such a nice story.
it is. Yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, that's cool. I didn't know that you were able to interview Gurinder Chadha.
Yes.
That's awesome. But have you been able to get a hold of Sarfraz?
So I that's that's a weird subject. When before the film came out, I had interacted with him on Twitter, and I said, "Hey, as the film gets closer, I would love to interview you." And he says, "Oh yeah, yeah, we'll make it happen." This is via Twitter. And then I guess a lot of people like, "Oh yeah, this will be great. This will be great." And he kind of sent a Twitter like, "Hey, can we wait till the movie's out? Before we talk about this?" Um and since then he's kind of not acknowledged me on Twitter or everything. So I don't know if it was just there's other things going on with him, but no, I have not had a chance to visit with him. Uh,
Oh,
but I felt great. She was just a joy. She, talk about funny, right, Ryan? We had exchanged emails. She had sent back saying, "Hey, I'm sorry I said yes, but now then I'm really in the middle of something. I just can't. I'm sorry." And so I waited a few months and I sent her an email, and she replied like, "Yeah, I haven't forgotten you. I'm just really busy." And then a couple months later, I sent another, "Hey, I'm not trying to be that guy, but everything." And she sent me an email, and it was Sunday morning. She says, "I have nothing on my schedule. If you can talk today, let's talk." So, so I went to my wife. I'm like, "Sorry, I don't know what else we're doing today, but I am about to record a podcast." She's like, "Go, go, go." So yeah.
oh, that's great. I feel like my wife would be the same.
Yes, exactly. Right. Like you're like, "Hey, yeah." So yeah, I think, if, if, if Kenny Loggins says, "Hey, yeah, I'd love to talk to you about some of the movies, like the songs I've written for movies." You're like, "Okay, yes, we got to talk to Kenny."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She'd be like, I'll figure out what to do with the kids. Like, go do
Yes,
your podcast.
exactly. Yeah.
So, out of the soundtrack, you got 12 Springsteen songs. There's some live cuts. There's an
Yes.
unreleased song that was written for a Harry Potter movie.
Yes, it was.
So tell me what your thoughts are with what they used from Bruce.
So Ryan, I've listened to some of your episodes, so I apologize if I'm asking something I should know. But is there a specific fandom that you are very passionate about?
Like, I'm really into Pavement and like the Replacements. I think those
Okay.
are a couple of my favorite bands. Foo Fighters as well.
Okay. So sometimes we passionate, I won't say obsessive, but us passionate fans can be pretty nitpicky. So I live in Dallas Fort Worth, and I have there was about 4 or 5 people that all live in Dallas that have all been on the podcast. And so we coordinated, and we went to the AMC theater that kind of was in the middle of the DFW area. We all picked which one. We all got there early, and it's one of those AMCs that have a bar, and we sat at the bar and we talked and visited, and we just had a great time. Then we all went into the movie together. And so we all come out of the movie and we are all singing its praises. But to a man, we all said there is a scene where Javi, his friend gives him 2 cassettes,
Hmm.
and then he comes back the next Monday, you assume, and talks about it, and he quotes lyrics from The River. The River was not on either one of those cassettes. That song is not on those cassettes. So this is pre-internet. So we're all going, how did he know to quote if it, the if his dream alive is it doesn't come true, or is it something else, right? So I said, well, what he didn't see is he went to the local music store and bought The River on cassette, and he was listening to that. And my friend said, only you would come up with an explanation to explain a mistake that makes them look kind. That was our only nitpick. That was funny. The other thing is, the Promised Land was not released at that time. So, but she said we we thought that the song fit the mood more than it did than being historically accurate of that time period, and so they thought that it was good. I really thought it was a great choice of songs. That they are it. They certainly could have picked more of the Born in the USA hits, but I thought they did a good mix of what it is and what it isn't. And so I thought it was a great use of the music. And there were, right, like when they do Born to Run, they did a nice little montage. It's almost like Beatles, from Beatles Help, or A Hard Day's Night. So I just thought it was really well done. I thought the use of the music worked really well in telling the story.
Yeah, and they used some like pretty, I don't know if I would call them deep live cuts, but they used
Yeah.
some pretty interesting like
Yes.
live cuts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like Blinded by the Light is from Bruce's first album. It is his only number one hit, and it wasn't by him. Manfred Mann had a number one hit with Blinded by the Light. Bruce himself has never had a number one single in the US. And so I thought that basically it worked perfect as a title, and to have that song, Prove It All Night and Because the Night are songs that, um, you know, um, because the Night, Patti Smith's version is more well known. Some really good choices. And, Badlands is a song that is a huge hit for live when you go see Bruce live. That is a song that a lot of people love. So, yeah, I thought it was a really good choices of which ones to use. So, yeah, I liked it a lot.
Did you know that the version of the river they used was from that No Nukes concert at Madison Square Garden in 1979? Like,
I did not. I am. There are a lot of things I'm good at, and recognizing those. Like, I have an online friend, Paul, that has a photographic memory of those kind of sprinting things. Like when he hears a song, he could say, "Oh, that's from this release, this date," or he could say, "Oh, yeah, that was, you know, on May 2nd, 1978, he was at this theater." I mean, he has that. I do not have that kind of memory. But I did recognize it was a live version. And the No Nukes film was just released. Speaking of soundtracks, and so we have gotten to see that in its glory now, where they took the two nights that they had filmed and kind of restored them and kind of gave us an hour and a half concert now, combining both nights.
yeah, I know that he is. I mean, obviously, he is a great songwriter and
Yes.
musician, but his live show, you know, I've, people just rave about seeing him just go on for like 3 hours with the
Yeah.
street band.
Yeah. Now, have you had a chance to see Bruce perform live?
I have not, and it's on
Okay.
my list.
Okay, so they've announced that they're touring in 2023. So far, they've only announced European dates. The thought is, and people who are a lot smarter and a lot more involved with me has said that they will announce soon that they'll start in the US in February. then they'll go to Europe for the summer, which why wouldn't they? Right? And then they will come back and do US in the fall. So hopefully you will get a chance to go and see him. Ryan, I believe there's two kinds of people. There's the people who go to their first Bruce show and go, wow, that was long. And then the others that go back and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm missing this. I need to go see him every chance I get.
I hope I can fall somewhere in between the two.
Okay, there you go. That's exactly, yeah, right.
I mean, I'm sure that I'm gonna love it,
Yeah,
but I also know that he is not a cheap ticket.
yes, exactly. Yes.
So I hope,
No,
like,
it
I
is
love
not.
it, but I
Yeah,
hope that
exactly. Yes, I am already, my job, we have a bonus program we call profit sharing, right? And so if we hit all our goals for the year, we get a bonus check right at the end of the year. And my joke has been to all my coworkers, this phrase, when someone's gambling, hey, mama needs new shoes. I'm like, Jesse needs Springsteen tickets. We need to hit our goals because I need that bonus for Springsteen tickets.
how many times would you say you have seen Bruce at this point?
17.
17? Wow.
17 times, including I was lucky enough to see him on Broadway, which
Oh, so you
was
did
a
catch that.
it was a very expensive ticket. I will forever be grateful to my wife. You mentioned your spouse, so um, if your audience will forgive me for going off on a little tangent, I believe, and I think you will agree, there are times when you're married that your spouse asks you a question and you have to say yes. Like, hey, can my sister come over and spend the night? Yes. Like, hey, we're going to go visit, we need to go visit blank blank. So put that on your calendar. You don't, there are things like, I like, hey, we need to go visit my mom. My wife can't say no, you can't. There's just certain things that you ask just because it's the polite thing to do, but the answer has to be yes.
Mhm.
So I pulled Linda aside and I said, okay, I'm going to ask you a question and you have permission to say no. She's like, okay, what's going on? Someone has reached out to me and says they can get me a Springsteen on Broadway ticket. It is expensive. You have the right to tell me, no, Jesse, we can't afford it. And she's like, really? I'm like, no, no. I mean, I do not want you later throwing this into my face. And so we did. We sat down and we're like, okay, here's what we could do, and here's what we could do. And so she made it so that I could go, and I'm forever grateful for that.
That's funny. When the Replacements got back together in 2013,
Yeah,
I think they announced a show in St. Paul in 2014,
yeah,
and I was able to get tickets, and I was going to go for sure. And I was just dating my wife at the time.
hmm
So I was like, oh, I got these replacement tickets. They're playing back in Minnesota because they had only played festivals in other states at this point.
yeah.
And my wife and my wife, then girlfriend, goes, oh, okay, so we're going to Minnesota. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I actually proposed to her on the trip after the show.
Oh, how fun! That's great. See, I know very little about the replacement, so we need to have you come back on, and you should give me in advance, like, here's your homework, Jesse. Go listen to these replacement songs, and then I should have you on to talk about the replacements because I have very little knowledge of it. Probably if you if you told me to play a couple of hits, like, oh yeah, that song, but it's not something that is front of mind. So that would be fun to talk about.
Yeah, let's do it. That'd be a lot of
Okay.
fun. I haven't been able to talk about the replacements on my podcast yet or anyone else's podcast. So
Okay, so good. We'll make that happen. So I did think it was interesting you mentioned this. Word had leaked that his children really loved Harry Potter. And so Bruce was reading it with them, and so he wrote a song and he sent it to the producers saying, "Hey, my kids love Harry Potter. I wrote this song. If you want to use it, use it." And they decided, I think wisely, that it would kind of break the spell, right? Like having a pop person do the sound would kind of break that world. So it was unreleased. And so I think it was really cool that, I'll Stand By You, that he had done, was able to, kind of over the credits. And so that officially got released for him.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fitting for this movie to get
Yes, it did.
that song.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as Harry Potter goes, I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan,
Yeah.
but I feel like if there were popular musicians related to it, like they had to play a character in the actual movie.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree.
And they weren't like, oh, you're going to sing a song from your catalog. You're just going to.
Right. It would have been, yeah. And there are people, there are, a fairly amount of Harry Potter, bands that play. I was able to have one, Tonk and the Aurors. I had the lead singer from that, because she's a huge Bruce Springsteen fan. In fact, my wife said, "I don't know if there's been a more perfect guest for you." She is a musician. She loves Bruce Springsteen. She performs in a Harry Potter band, and she did a CD of songs based on the West Wing. I am worried you are going to leave me and marry this woman.
That is a very specific catalog of music.
Yes, it was. It was. Yeah, it's yeah, Tonkin the Aurors, and she did. She actually had done a little bitty EP of Let Bartlett Be Bartlett that were West Wing themed songs. She does a lot of work in the like libraries. They'll book people to play for Harry Potter themed. And so yeah, she's done that, and she's a huge Springsteen fan.
I mean, I'm sure there's a huge cross section of people who love Springsteen and who love Harry Potter because they're both hugely popular.
Yeah.
But my brain is still
I
trying to
can see that.
process.
I know this is an audio podcast, but for our listeners, it is. I have given. You know how your dog will crook his head up and look at you like, "What's going on?" That is what Ryan is doing. Ryan is like, "This doesn't. That These two things don't go together." I will tell you a connection. This is one of my favorite stories. Um, a few years ago, Bruce wrote an autobiography, and he did tours. He actually went to bookstores, and he did not sign the book in front of you. It was pre-signed, but you stood in line, you got your picture taken with him, and then you left, and then they gave you a copy of the signed autobiography. And a 7-year-old and her mom were at the signing somewhere in the East Coast, and the mom wrote a column that said, "This is what I would have told Bruce if I'd had time." And she told the story, and that Juniper, which is the young girl's name, was born premature. And they really did not think she was going to make it. And her and her husband would read Harry Potter to her while she was in the incubator, and they would play Bruce Springsteen songs. So when they asked Juniper, "Did it bother you that you didn't get to talk to Bruce very long?" She said, "Nah, he knows me. He wrote me all these songs." Uh, and then the Harry Potter connection is when J.K. Rowling found out that this young girl did that. She sent a complete set of Harry Potter books signed, and each book said "To Juniper, the girl who lived," and sent them to her. So there's the Harry Potter Bruce Springsteen connection.
That's very cool. That's such a great story.
Thanks. There's one other story I want to share with you, and then please, I hate to take over the podcast, but I don't know if you remember, in the movie there is a scene where our hero goes to Jersey, and
Yes.
that scene is in trailer. That is based on a true story, but the real story is better than the one in the movie. In the real story, the writer of the book was an adult, and right after 9/11, he had to fly to the United States. And he, being Pakistani, was very nervous about going through customs right after 9/11 because of the way he looked. And he said that he stood in line at there to get into the country. He presents his passport and visa, and the guy looking at him and says, what is the purpose of your visit? And he said, I'm going to a Bruce Springsteen concert. And the guy broke into a huge smile and says, I cannot think of a better reason for you to come to this country. Have a great show. And the idea, I mean, it's a great scene in the movie, but the idea that right after 9/11, that you're so worried because you don't look the right way, and to have someone go, oh man, you're going to see Bruce, go have a great time, I think is just a beautiful story.
Yeah. And it's another, I think that's one of the themes of the movie, the music transcending,
Yes.
all these different cultures.
Yes.
For me, it was really, I guess it really resonated with me. You know, I am Asian American,
Yes.
and he is Asian British.
Yeah.
I'm not sure of the right term for that, but
Right.
like it wasn't as dramatic in my family. But I think the idea of wanting to do something that your parents didn't quite intend for you to do, that resonated with me, and not that I had the kids pissing in my like mail slot or anything like that,
Yeah.
but like dealing with racism, and the question that his dad asks him, like, do you think you're British? Like, you will always be Pakistani. I feel like, especially now, like I always felt like I'm an American, but there are for sure people that are going to only see me as Asian.
Yes. So last year I had a guest joining me um, who was Taiwanese, and she wrote a beautiful column, and that's how I found her, and I asked her to join me on the podcast, of her complicated relationship with Born in the USA, that song. She loves Bruce Springsteen, but the first time she heard the song was she was young, and her brother was like Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, something. And children were going around their tent singing Born in the USA, taunting them that they aren't American. And so she says often at a Bruce show, she's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Then when it gets to Born in the USA, she kind of sits, puts her hands down, and the next song, yeah, yeah, yeah. So once again, I am smart enough to know that someone who looks like me, a short, fat, white guy. I was born in Louisiana. I lived in Texas since 1986. I don't, I have no idea of the road someone who looks different than I have gone through. And we'll get serious just for a moment, then we'll move to something else silly, Ryan. I get upset with people who can't acknowledge that difference. And I'm not calling it white privilege. I'm not calling it everything. It's just my life is very different than someone who does not look like the standard, you know, blonde, blue-eyed American, you know?
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes when I go to a show, like when I went to the Replacements reunion in Minnesota,
Yeah.
I think I got a couple of weird looks of like, oh, there's this Asian couple walking around,
Yeah.
you know, for the show that people waited over 20 years for. But these people also didn't realize I also grew up in the Twin Cities for like a good part of my life.
Yeah.
And it's like I'm just as Minnesotan as the rest of you.
Yeah, exactly. There is a wonderful story that Bruce tells in his both in his autobiography and in the he did those series of podcasts with President Obama. And there is a great story that they were on the Amnesty tour, and they were playing Africa, and they walked out on stage, and the crowd was filled with people of color, with black people. And Clarence walked over and said, "Now you know how I feel every night." And Bruce said that they played and the audience was great and they loved it. But I just love that line of Clarence going, "Now you know how I feel."
Yeah, that's right. My wife said the same thing when I hadn't been to Korea till after I got married,
Okay.
and we went to Korea, and she's like, "How does it feel to like be the majority?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "I never really thought of that."
Yeah. It is. And going back to the movie, I think they did a great job of showing how his relationship with his father and how he grew to accept that. And I think it's a really sweet spoilers. He ends up selling all his Bruce Springsteen material as he's going away to university to rebuy a piece of jewelry that his father had to hawk of his mother's. And just, he, you can be two things. He can be Pakistani, he can be British, he can be a dutiful son, yet also have his own voice and have his own path. And so the movie is very entertaining. I think the female lead is just incredibly charming. She just really works. And for you Marvel Universe fans, Agent Carter has a small part in this movie. It's actually an important part, but I love the fact that we had her. That oh, why am I drawing a blank on her name? Haley Atwell plays one of his teachers, and I'm like, look, it's Agent Carter.
Oh, that's who it was.
Yes.
I was like, she sounds and looks very familiar. It's Haley
Yep,
Atwell.
that's it. She was it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a feel good movie, but I think that it does it so well that you don't mind.
Yes.
Like you kind of know where the story is going to go, but
Right.
they execute it so well where it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and this came out the same time as Yesterday, the Beatles movie. So I think that may have hurt the box office on both of them, right? And the other thing, it's a really good. The guy who plays his best friend, there's some nice scenes too where he, you know, kind of calls out that I've always been there for you. I was always supporting you, and now then you've kind of left me. And so I think it's really well done. I think the music plays a great part. There is a wonderful scene where they do it. His sister takes him to a daytime rave, playing all this pop music, and in his mind he's like, oh yeah, there are other genres of music that can bring joy to other people. It doesn't just have to be Bruce. It just doesn't have to be you know um, this Thunder Road or Born to Run.
Yeah, I think it's important that they show that him and his siblings, they can all express themselves through music. It doesn't have to be like, well, you have to listen to Bruce Springsteen too to
Yes.
feel like, you know, you, you have music that is talking to you or
Yeah,
that resonates
absolutely.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance to the film that it wouldn't have if it was in less capable hands.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, she is a gifted director, a gifted writer. Blinded by the Light. I mean, Bend It Like Beckham is a wonderful film, and so I think she was really happy with this, um, and I think it's a wonderful addition to kind of the mystique of Bruce. That you have this. It is about him, but it is more about this family and this journey, and as you talked about, this we hear a lot about in the US our own racial problems, that whether you're brown or black or white and the different interactions we have, and to see this, from different eyes from the UK in the 80s, that um, the problems that you know the conservative government at that time was causing the issues, and Bruce is talking about in the river there is not much work because of the economy, and Javi's father loses his job. He was a company man. He was someone that his job was his identity, and to have that is I think really really speaks to all of us that have had that kind of experience.
Yeah, and then I think the mom, or
Yeah.
his dad's wife, makes a really good point. He's when the dad is kind of at his lowest, she says, your job as a father is to like care about everyone. You definitely care about your family.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be about being the breadwinner. You're still being everyone's father.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I like how they kind of humanize him. Um, you know, uh, yeah, I just think everything is really well done with all the relationships within the film.
Yeah. I do. I think obviously I'm going into this film wanting it to be great, and I was rewarded. I knew no. A couple of Springsteen fans did not enjoy it as much. They just they thought it was a little too cheesy, but I thought it was just the right amount of a feel good film. And the reality is, it could be any musician, it could be any sport. It's something that helps you find meaning in life, and sometimes that's podcasting, right, Ryan?
Right.
Where this is not my day gig, but this is where, and obviously our families give us great joy, but you know podcasting and getting to talk to people like you and my other guests, and is just, it brings me such joy. And so I just love that movie kind of says, find your voice, find what helps you express yourself, and embrace it.
Yeah, I think the line that he gives at the big speech in the end is so perfect, where he says, I want to build a bridge to my dreams, but not a wall between me and my family.
Yes. Well said. Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I really
Good.
enjoyed the
I'm glad.
movie. Um, I, I think I was one of the people that got kind of confused with yesterday.
Sure.
I think because the yesterday trailer looked so bad,
hmm
it kind of crossed my wires when it came to wanting to watch this movie.
Yes, I
Because
could see that.
what the plot of that one is, like, he gets hit by a bus and is in some alternate universe where nobody knows the songs of the Beatles except him.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, which is odd. Not a bad film, but very different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like this is based on someone's actual life
Yes, it absolutely is. Yeah.
and
Good.
not some sort of weird fantasy.
Yes, exactly. Very, very different. Yeah. Well, good. Well, thank you. This was a blast. I had so much fun.
Yeah, it was great chatting with you about this film and about Bruce Springsteen in general.
Yes. So we're going to book it. You're going to come and join me. We're going to talk replacements.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right,
Absolutely.
that sounds good. We'll figure out. That'll be a lot of fun. That sounds good.
So, if people want to check out your podcast, when do you release new episodes?
So I release usually on Tuesdays and sometimes on Thursdays, depending on my backlog. You can reach me on social media at Jesse Jackson DFW. The show is at Setlusting Bruce on Twitter as well. Um, I am on Facebook. There's Setlusting Bruce on Facebook, and follow me on Twitter. And if you want to join me, if you're a Springsteen fan, you want to join me, let me know. If you are passionate about another band or another musician, I'd love to have you come in and join me. I have had everyone from people Guns N' Roses to the Bee Gees to Hall and Oates to I'm going to be doing a series of episodes in August on the singer-songwriter John Hyatt. So if you're passionate about music, I want to have you join me and we can visit.
Perfect.
And how about yourself? If people want to reach you,
You can find us on Twitter at soundtrack_your and on Instagram at soundtrackcast.
good.